South Park has never been shy about poking fun at other forms of pop culture. In 2009 alone, they took aim at everything from the Jonas Brothers to Whale Wars to James Cameron's Avatar. That same year, Matt Stone and Trey Parker also offered their take on the weird world of professional wrestling, a world that, by their own admission, they don't really know all too much about. But while that disconnect is extremely apparent in certain creative choices, their decision to essentially depict wrestling as a form of theater resulted in them stumbling upon what is, in many ways, actually an astonishingly accurate depiction of how pro wrestlers tend to operate. So with WrestleMania season in full swing, let's take a look back at the time South Park stepped into the squared circle in season 13's WTF.
For wrestling!
So, a bit of context before we really dive into things. Matt and Trey are well known by now for striking when the iron is hot when it comes to their parodies. I'm not entirely sure we can say that about this episode, but WTF did first air just one day after the WWE video game SmackDown vs. Raw 2010 released, and just a few days before WWE's inaugural bragging rights pay-per-view, which was sponsored by the very same game. So while the episode didn't have the same crossover appeal that it might have if it debuted around, say, WrestleMania in April, it definitely came out at a time when a lot of people had WWE on the brain. Although, in 2009, we were also nearly a decade removed from the height of WWE's cultural dominance during the Attitude Era. So, let's say, striking while the iron is warm. Speaking of crossover appeal, Matt and Trey explained in the episode's commentary that part of the reason they decided to spoof WWE is because they knew a good number of South Park fans watched pro wrestling as well.
There's a big cross audience with the WWE and South Park people.
But they would have been especially correct years earlier. After all, early South Park and Attitude Era WWE were both very much part of the same edgier cultural zeitgeist that took hold in the late 1990s and early 2000s.
I say whatever I want, when I want, how I want.
In fact, back in the 90s, there was even a wrestler named Golga who apparently loved Eric Cartman. As in, he often wrestled in Cartman t-shirts and always came to the ring holding a big Cartman plush. And no, this was never actually explained. As for the episode itself, the inciting incident is quintessential South Park. Like a lot of kids in real life, Stan, Cartman, Kyle, and Kenny love to just go all in whenever they become interested in a new trend or hobby, and that's exactly what happens in WTF. When the four boys, as well as Butters, Jimmy, and Tolkien, go see WWE Monday Night Raw, they are instantly hooked on pro wrestling.
We know what our calling in life is now. Tomorrow we are signing up for wrestling class.
This whole opening scene perfectly encapsulates the odd duality of this episode, because it's spot on with certain things, but totally off base when it comes to others.
Mess him up, Ed! Kick his ass, whee!
We see the boys watching a promo battle between Edge and John Cena. So far, so good. Edge and Cena had one of the defining rivalries of the Ruthless Aggression era, and while the bulk of their on-screen feud played out in 2006, they did run it back for WrestleMania in 2009. Not only that, but WWE storylines are notorious for dipping into soap opera territory, with rivalries forming over everything from child custody disputes to infidelity. The episode nails this as well.
I've got something else to tell you, Edge. I slept with Vanessa last night.
However, it also completely flips the script on the Edge-Cena feud, depicting Edge as the sympathetic hero or babyface, and Cena as the dirtbag villain or heel. Edge laments how Cena's antics have all but cost him his livelihood, which earns him the full-throated support of the redneck crowd because
He took his job!
in reality, it was Cena who was portrayed as the hardworking, all-American good guy for most of his career, and while Edge has had stints as a babyface, he's easily best known for his long heel run, in which he played the role of the sleazy, underhanded womanizer. I mean, you don't get nicknames like the Rated R Superstar or the Ultimate Opportunist by being a good guy. Looking back, it's strange in general to see South Park lampoon Cena before he was a super mainstream Hollywood actor. Like, why does he have a British accent in this?
Say that again, Edge. You think you're better than me?
Also, judging by his lack of a flappy head, I'm going to assume no one told Matt and Trey that Edge is actually Canadian, but I guess guys like James Cameron and Justin Bieber get the same pass. On the subject of character models, though, it's also weird how they went to all the trouble of making detailed, accurate renders for John Cena and Edge, only to make Edge's girlfriend a completely made-up person. Edge had a number of actual on-screen love interests over the years, including Lita, who was not only a big part of the initial Cena feud, but even looks to be on the t-shirt Kenny is wearing. And speaking of the t-shirts, most Most of the boys can be seen wearing these low-rent parodies, while Cartman and Tolkien are just straight up wearing nearly one-to-one recreations of actual WWE shirts. Cartman's Get the F Out shirt was sold as part of the promotional campaign when WWE changed its name from WWF in 2002. Tolkien's shirt is even more era appropriate. It's a CM Punk shirt that came out in 2008 and saw a lot of TV time going into 2009. It's kind of fascinating to see which real-life details they really honed in on and which they just brushed aside. But by far the biggest thing this episode gets wrong is its depiction of wrestling fans. It really leans into the idea that they're all just dim-witted rednecks who don't realize that the whole thing is actually staged. To use wrestling terminology, they're all a bunch of dumb marks.
What you mean it ain't real?
The truth of the matter is that the overwhelming majority of modern wrestling fans are fully in on the act. They watch it the same way they'd watch a movie or TV show, not the same way they'd watch a football or basketball game.
Definitely there's a few people stupid enough to think it's real, but for the most part, I don't even think the people there think it's real.
That's why whenever you see wrestling fans discussing the results of a match, they're not talking about how the losing wrestler could have potentially used their skills to win, but rather whether or not the results make sense from a creative or storytelling perspective.
Yeah, no, I think Congo is a great wrestler. I just think Rad Russian has his number.
The sheer athleticism on display is also a huge draw, something Matt and Trey acknowledge in their commentary.
I didn't think it was real. I just thought it was athletic, I guess.
The redneck stereotype might have been more applicable in the 70s or early 80s, back when American pro wrestling was very regional, and the fact that it was fake was still an aggressively guarded secret. But by 2009, that era was long dead. Once the internet arrived, it became abundantly clear to everyone that the cat was not going back in the bag, and they mostly just let it ride from there, oftentimes even embracing that new status quo.
What a mark.
And obviously, for this episode, it's way funnier if literally everyone in the audience thinks everything is real. Regardless, the redneck fans continue to play a significant role as the rest of the story unfolds. When the boys sign up for wrestling class, they immediately learn that amateur wrestling, the actual competitive sport you'd see in school or at the Olympics, is not at all what they were hoping for.
The f*** is this?
I'll circle back to that subplot later, but for now, the guys decide to form their own backyard wrestling league, the Wrestling Takedown Federation, or WTF, rapidly amassing a dedicated fan base by copying the kind of stuff that they were seeing in WWE.
Apparently that crippled kid slept with that Russian kid's girlfriend.
It's from this point on that the episode absolutely shines in its accurate satirization of pro wrestling. Matt and Trey may not be the most hardcore fans of the sport, but they did clock it as simply being another form of scripted entertainment, albeit with a much higher risk of injury.
It's kind of not that different than what we do. It's just like putting on a show every week,
By coming at it from that angle, they started to hit bullseye after bullseye, sometimes without even realizing it.
And we learned that backyard wrestling is huge too.
Yeah.
There's tons of backyard wrestling things, and see, that's kind of out of touch.
Yeah, those do not try this at home warnings aren't super effective when it comes to wrestling. Backyard wrestling has been prevalent for a long time. But while South Park's whole thing is taking simple childhood shenanigans to absurd extremes, a group of literal children drawing paying crowds to their backyard wrestling league really isn't all that far-fetched. Almost this exact thing happened in Minnesota back in the 80s. Some small town kids formed their own promotion called NWF, aired weekly shows on public access TV, and even ran successful live events at the local armory. There's a whole documentary about it and everything, so, art really imitated life here. But at the heart of WTF satire is an observation that wrestling fans have been making for years, that pro wrestlers are basically just super buff theater kids.
Oh my god, 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 we become pro wrestlers, I'm completely freaking out.
This is where that classic South Park escalation comes into play. As the boys grow their league, the actual wrestling instantly takes a backseat to all the drama and storylines, and they start laying it on real thick with a bunch of theater imagery. There's even a whole costume dance number at one point. Interestingly enough, this episode premiered just 2 years before Matt and Trey's Book of Mormon made its Broadway debut. They more thoroughly skewered that world in season 15's Broadway Brodown, but I figured I'd bring this up since WTF and Broadway Brodown are actually kind of great companion pieces. This episode depicts wrestlers as these easily flustered thespians, and that one portrays musical writers as beer-swilling sports bros, so it's a funny inversion.
What makes you the authority, bro? West Side Story, bro? What, bro? Sweeney Todd, bro?
Mind you, while pro wrestling has a surprising amount in common with stage musicals, it's not a perfect one-to-one by any means. For starters, those types of plays are very thoroughly choreographed, whereas wrestling is a bit more freeform. The winner of a given match is predetermined by the booker, and some of the bigger, more elaborate moments tend to be planned out well ahead of time, but the wrestlers are generally able to figure out the rest as they play, sometimes completely on the fly.
I've never been in the ring with anybody that could call an audible like him and be that open and giving.
If you're ever watching a wrestling match and you see a wrestler put their opponent in a headlock or something and get really close to them, chances are they're whispering what they're gonna do next. So it's less like traditional musical theater and more like really physical improv with specific bullet points you need to hit.
Your girlfriend is a whore. Wait for it. Wait for the whore line. Oh, I'm sorry.
But even though it is exceedingly rare for a wrestling match to be fully choreographed in the same way a play is, it's also not unheard of. The late great Macho Man Randy Savage was kind of famous for doing that sort of thing. And on the other end of the spectrum, some wrestlers are able to more or less go full improv with it, especially once they've built up a rapport.
I could put my gear on right now and I guarantee I could have an entire match with Rey Mysterio and not talk to him once.
More often than not, though, they'll land somewhere in the middle, with wrestlers bouncing ideas off of each other before bell time, and South Park deduces as much.
So I'm thinking we do the part about Jimmy's relationship with his alcoholic father after you smash Butters onto the table. Oh, sure, that works.
They even get bonus points for recognizing that the referee is just as important to any given match as the wrestlers themselves. Not only are referees a whole other body in the ring to keep track of, but they often get physically involved to some degree and need to be as on point as anyone in order to make sure everything stays safe and goes according to plan. And in the event that something legitimately goes wrong, they have to be ready to leap into action. The art of pro wrestling really is built on one big chain of trust, and the boys quickly embrace that.
Then Butters, you come in as the ref, all like, no, the fight hasn't started yet, and that's when Jimmy sneaks out from behind and hits me over the head with the fold-away chair. Okie doke.
While I'm at it, you may notice how the role of referee briefly shifts to Stan when it's Butters' turn to wrestle, and that leads into something else I want to talk about, the actual characters they're playing.
What's your name?
The Rad Russian.
What?
Honestly, most of the gimmicks they came up with are pretty dated, even by 2009 standards. They're not necessarily inaccurate, just seemingly informed by a bygone era. But to be fair, South Park isn't the only guilty party here. A lot of shows that depict wrestling do this, and while he had long since fallen out of it by the time he worked on this episode, Matt Stone was apparently a big wrestling fan for a brief time when he was a kid in the 80s, so it makes sense that he'd draw more from that era.
And I got into the characters. I remember it was like the Road Warriors and Hulk Hogan.
But another thing WTF gets shockingly right is the idea of one wrestler playing multiple different characters. We primarily see this through Cartman, who has his main persona, the Rad Russian, as well as a second character named Bad Irene.
Not in love with you, I'm in love with abortions, don't you understand?
In real life, this sort of thing usually happens via something called repackaging. Basically, when a wrestler fans have seen before re-debuts under a new gimmick, typically after spending time off of TV for one reason or another. Remember how I was talking about Golga earlier? Classic example. The character was played by the late John Tenta, who's best known for wrestling in WWE as Earthquake during the golden age of the late 80s and early 90s. When he returned to the company for the Attitude Era after a stint in WCW, he had his leather mask on and his Cartman doll in hand. The same wrestler playing different characters in the same company at the same time, like Cartman does here, is rarer, but it does happen. It's usually meant to be tongue-in-cheek though, like in 1998 when Mick Foley used his alternate personas to keep entering the same Royal Rumble match after being eliminated. That actually does feel like something Cartman would try to pull now that I think about it.
If you cheat and fail, you're a cheater. If you cheat and succeed, you're savvy.
At any rate, the boys' success eventually catches the attention of WWE, which decides to scout the WTF for talent. Again, super accurate. Big wrestling companies are always looking at smaller, independent promotions for the potential next big thing. In fact, something WWE used to do was enter agreements with these sort of companies to turn them into developmental territories. Essentially, regional feeder leagues meant to get young prospects ready for a more national stage.
Gentlemen, we have heard of your wrestling organization and are quite interested in its popularity.
One of the most notable examples was OVW, which trained a lot of future stars, including eventual Hollywood A-listers John Cena and Dave Bautista. However, WWE would go on to centralize its developmental program. By 2008, their main feeder league was a company called FCW. 4 years later, they acquired the promotion outright and rebranded it as NXT, a name that will be relevant again in a second. But while WWE now develops most, if not all, of its prospects in-house, they do still maintain scouting relationships with indie feds through things like the WWE ID program.
This is our shot at making it into the WWE.
Seeing this as their opportunity to go big time, the boys decide to bring in some fresh talent of their own, and in keeping with the theatrical motif, they don't hold tryouts but auditions. They line up a bunch of prospects and give them each a prompt that they have to improvise a promo around. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this exact thing happened on mainline WWE TV shortly after this episode came out, no less. You see, before the brand replaced FCW entirely, NXT was the name of a reality-style competition competition show where FCW wrestlers competed for WWE contracts. The show premiered in 2010 and saw the new prospects take part in various challenges to avoid elimination. One such challenge involved them each being given an inane topic that they had to come up with a promo about on the spot, complete with a panel of established WWE wrestlers serving as judges. This was all in front of a live audience too, so it was a real trial by fire, and the results were, let's call them mixed.
What is a mustache?
But all in all, WTF does an incredible job at showing how, at its best, pro wrestling is ultimately a group of people working closely together to tell a story and entertain a crowd.
Let's do this. 1, 2, backyard wrestling!
That said, it also shows that wrestling can be, at its worst, a mess of clashing egos and behind-the-scenes drama that threatens to undermine all of that work. If you're at all familiar with the inner workings of pro wrestling, you've no doubt heard the phrase backstage politics, which refers to when wrestlers use their clout to aggressively lobby either for themselves or against others with respect to how they're presented. This sort of backstage drama sometimes even spills out in front of the audience.
Because Hulk Hogan tonight wants to play his creative control card.
That's precisely what happens near the end of this episode. The whole reason they decide to hold auditions in the first place is because Cartman and Kenny decide that Tolkien, Butters, and Jimmy aren't good enough to be at the top of the card. The two plead their case to Stan and Kyle, who agree to kill their push. They are literally burying Tolkien, Butters, and Jimmy in the booking meeting.
Guys, let's face it, they can't wrestle for crap. I mean, every time I wrestle with one of them, they flub a line or blow their monologue.
Nasty work, and the kind of thing you always hear about in real life. Plus, as the cherry on top of the accuracy sundae, this all culminates in the boys shooting on each other, or fighting for real when their big show ends in disaster. Granted, it's punctuated by one last inaccuracy. I mentioned earlier how the physicality of wrestling is a big part of its appeal, but in what is admittedly a pretty funny gag, all the redneck fans completely turn on the show the second they see any actual fighting.
This has gotta be fake. Screw this is just stupid.
But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk more about this episode's B story, which is itself very true to life in a lot of ways. It centers on Mr. Connors, the local amateur wrestling coach who hates WWE.
Where's all the cool costumes and jumping off ropes and stuff?
Oh, not this again.
He is constantly frustrated by how when most people hear the word wrestling, they immediately think of the fake sport, not the real one. To add insult to injury, his attempts to turn people onto actual wrestling are met with nothing but ridicule. Worse yet, these two things working in tandem end up costing him his job.
Wrestling simply involves too much adult subject matter, like murder and abortion.
No, this isn't wrestling!
The way this all plays out is obviously another example of that South Park escalation, but it speaks to a very real trend. How people involved with amateur wrestling and other legitimate combat sports tend to hold a negative view of pro wrestling, for the exact same reasons Mr. Connors does. Their real sport taking a backseat to a fake one in the public eye can get pretty annoying. Not to mention the disrespect Olympic-style wrestling sometimes encounters just on its own.
Mister, you better take your gay porn and walk right out of this bar.
At the end of his rope, or on the top of his rope maybe, Mr. Connors decides to take matters into his own hands and cut the head off of WWE itself. When his plan fails, he basically cuts an impassioned promo lamenting everything he's been through, and it really strikes a chord with the audience.
Oh man, they took your job. They took her.
In an ironic twist, Connors ends up being the one to receive a WWE contract. And one last time, art imitates life, because while it's true that many amateur wrestlers dislike pro wrestling, the feeling is not universal. Plenty of kids sign up for their local wrestling club because they love the stuff they see on TV, just like Cartman and the guys did. Some of them even eventually come full circle with it. A lot of famous pro wrestlers do have amateur wrestling backgrounds. Hell, WWE Hall of Famer Kurt Angle is an actual Olympic gold medal wrestler. He may have mentioned that 1 or 2 times before.
I got Olympic gold. I got Olympic gold.
It's not often that pro wrestling is depicted accurately or even particularly well in pop culture. There are exceptions, sure, but they are just that, exceptions. And if you're a fan who's looking for one of those diamonds in the rough, WTF makes for a great exercise in patience. Some of the inaccuracies early on may have you rolling your eyes a bit, but once the episode really gets going, it locks in on a satirical approach that hits much closer to home than most would probably expect from something written by non-wrestling fans.
You know, Cartman does this and that and the other, and like to make some like super dramatic thing that doesn't have anything to do with wrestling, and then we'd watch some WWE or Raw, and then they do that stuff.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It also acts as a bit of a time capsule for that era of wrestling. Keep in mind, when WPF first aired in 2009, WWE was sort of at the peak of its dominance over American pro wrestling as a whole. It was sort of like a Kleenex or Band-Aid situation, where most people use the name WWE to refer to all wrestling. And this is reflected in the episode itself. Apart from the boys' backyard league, you never really hear about other promotions, and the company's presentation is rather monolithic.
This is all your fault, you WWE president asshole.
But this is a great episode of South Park, and while they don't circle back to the same ideas all that often, it'd honestly be interesting to see them take another crack at pro wrestling. I mean, running an overpriced WTF reunion show sounds like a pretty solid Cartman scheme, right? In the meantime, I'll leave the actual pro wrestling talk to those who really specialize in the area. I mean, not trying to take their jobs.
He took his job! He took it, girl! Took it there!
Folks, thanks for tuning into this South Park video. This was another script by Noah Dominguez, and his insight as a true wrestling fan, I think, really takes this episode breakdown to another level. If you're looking for another script where Noah's insight really elevates the subject matter, the video we did on South Park's Goth Kids would be another great place to start. Make sure to check out his other work as well, link in the description. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.